Hello, fellow preppers and YouTubers across the world. This particular video is going to be more for people who are trying to understand what a prepper is and less for people who are already a prepper. The question before us in this video is, why should we be prepared? Why is preparation necessary? Why is this something that we should be interested in? Preppers already know this if you're already engaged into this lifestyle, so you may or may not want to listen to these next few minutes. But for the new person, someone who wants to be prepared, someone who wants to accumulate knowledge, skills, goods, a backup reserve of just basic stuff like food, water, and medicine. They do this because they do want to prevent loss of life unnecessarily, and also to reduce suffering from yourself. You don't want to suffer, or maybe you don't want to see your family suffer, or friends. Maybe just your neighbors too. Maybe a lot of your friends and family don't live nearby, and if something happened locally, maybe you would want to take care of some of your neighbors. Whatever it is, you want to avoid needless suffering and death. That's the short of it right there. Preparation is about having the ability to overcome obstacles and threats so that you can get to the other side where you can look back and go, okay, we got through that. And what's the next step of recovery and rebuilding? So that's what it is in a nutshell. Now, to expand on it just slightly, I would like to just add that, there's different kind of preparation. Depending on where you live and what you deem necessary as essential will determine how you prepare. And so not everybody prepares the same way. So it's a kind of a very tricky question of why should we prepare when we can't sometimes even define what it is to be prepared, but we can in some ways in a generic way, for example. So we all have to eat. We all have to have some water. We all have medical needs when we get injured and so forth. If you go through each category, it depends on, your philosophy of what meets a category, but there's anywhere from like 13 to 16 categories depending on how you group things together and what system of prepping you subscribe to. But when you look at it overall, this satisfaction of each category, when you satisfy a category, you have that type of reserve, that type of fallback tucked away so that you can retrieve it when you need it, if you need it, God forbid. Just like if you lost your job, you could have an emergency fund that would be maybe like part of it in the bank in a form of a savings account. So it's very liquid. You don't have to go sell stocks and bonds. Maybe part of your emergency fund is in a safe in your home. Maybe it's divided up at a few of your friends' home, tucked away in one of their safes. So you have diversification in where your emergency fund was, for one. Number two, you have the emergency fund. And number three, you have enough of it to weather a worst case scenario in case you couldn't get a new job for, let's say, another 3 to 6 months. It's the same thing for prepping. You got to have enough reserve of food and water. And can you handle a major trauma for first aid? Can you deal with shelter options and fire making options for warmth? Or can you stay cool in a very hot summer? These are things that you're going to have to address within prepping, just as you would any other contingency or planning for relieving misery in a disaster, be it a personal disaster like losing a job or a financial disaster, or number two, a man-made of a large-scale disaster, such as a very bad train derailment, and there's toxic plumes of chemicals that make you have to evacuate for a week while there's the cleanup, and that could you could incur great expenses, staying in a hotel or whatever. Are you prepared for that? Or on maybe even a somewhat worse scenario for a larger amount of people, it could be something like a massive hurricane if you live like on maybe the East Coast, for example, and your house or dwelling was destroyed. You know, can you pick up the pieces enough? Do you have enough diversified resources to gather to actually continue on the path of life in a reasonable fashion so that you can occur the least amount of suffering possible, short of having a second home? These are questions to ask yourself. So why should you be prepared? Because by not being prepared, you are a burden on others. You will suffer more personally. Your family will suffer more. And you don't have the same peace of mind than when you are prepared. So being prepared solves a lot of day-to-day challenges and tasks and problems. Being prepared is basically the summary of efforts that can take many years, even decades, to get to that level sometimes you really want to be. And sometimes you just never get to exactly where you want to be, but because you try ongoing and you keep building your skills and your awareness of the world and your preps, especially your physical ones, you get to a point though that you can at least endure the great majority of what could be thrown at you. You may personally still feel like you have a lot to grow. And that's not really a bad thing because we all need to grow our entire life. But what is quintessential is that you have something to fall back on. And the best way to do this is to start now, to start slow, to make a plan before you do anything. And when I say start now, it just can mean taking out a legal sheet of paper or a binder or a clipboard and putting some paper down and just writing out the categories of things, of preparations you would want to work on and the things in those categories, and having those plan, put in a place. And over time, which it could be a week or a month from now, after really refining those lists and those groupings of gear and knowledge that you want to learn, then start actually doing them. So you make a plan first, and then you start to accumulate those aspects of the plan until the plan is put into effect. This is a little bit more difficult than it sounds, but if you chip away at it every day, or at least several times a week, and you have focus and purpose, and you know that this is something you want to do, and this is something that you are doing actively, and you can get someone else involved with you doing this, so you're not alone when you're doing this, it's going to be that much better and that much more of a chance that you will be successful. And so overall, don't get so stuck on, especially if you're a guy, this typically is that the stereotypical prepper, if you even want to call them that all you think you need is a couple, good knives, or maybe 100 knives, and 50 rifles and 1,000,000 rounds of ammunition, and that's it. While you don't have any food or water set back, those are the people that I have some concerns, because they may get so desperate that they may want to come to your dwelling and try to take what is yours. I personally don't think that they're even what you would call preppers in the true sense, because a real prepper is a diversified individual in terms of they prep for all categories and all major contingencies for things that are likely, and they're not stuck on individual categories at all. Just because you may have a lot of guns, and you should have ways to protect yourself. I'm not knocking anybody. I'm a very strong advocate for the Second Amendment and for gun ownership, also for knife, ownership and all that. But you can get you can get in a disharmonious type of flow when you get stuck on one type of category, maybe of tools or like we were just talking about, weaponry. Self-protection or personal protection is not the only category. In a lot of people's mind that do this professionally or, in a serious manner, preparation is involved mainly in other categories other than personal protection. While you need it to keep your prep safe and your family safe, there's a lot more importance on having a very good beefed up trauma kit and knowing a lot of advanced first aid skills and having that food supply and the ability to purify water in various amounts of ways and to protect yourself in various environments by learning all kinds of alternative shelter making techniques and even repair and carpentry work. If you can shelter in your home, but your home is damaged, could you repair your home? So having these practical skills, these homesteading skills, are things that people don't talk about, and it could be because society has become so much more of an urban dwelling people. Society has gotten so used to being, in this city-like urban landscape, and there are other options to prepare. You can look at things, and you can choose even to live in a different way. Sometimes people who get into prepping, they may live in a city and then they realize, wow, that's probably not the best idea to be located in a large population center. If something bad went down, you would have the higher chances of suffering yourself and being, mixed in and involved with maybe a lot of things that you don't want to have anything to do with. So with that being said, you may have to change your lifestyle because prepping is a lifestyle. Not that you can't prep in the city or in the suburbs, but there's a lot more potential and a lot more flexibility when you're outside of those and when you're more in a rural area. Being rural is not for everyone, though. I would say that. And for a lot of people, their jobs won't allow it, or it's not really that practical, depending on what you're doing and your specialties. But being said, though, if you do have the option, living in a more rural area is much more conducive to being more prepared because typically you have more space. Typically you have more natural resources, you have more room and less of a population to threaten you. And typically, though, people out in the country just are better prepared because they can be farmers or they have land, and some people are just used to not being able to get around in bad weather, so they just typically already have things put back for the winter. These are just a few thoughts, among others. If you have any thoughts about what the definition of being prepared is or why you should be prepared, feel free to comment or do a video response. That would be very cool. But in summary, the reason why you'd want to be prepared is because you don't want to suffer needlessly, and you don't want to be a burden on others, and you want to be a responsible person to handle yourself. And any self-respecting person will want to actually get themselves out of harm and not rely on the government or your neighbor, and not just be willy-nilly and be a weak person. You want to be a strong person with great forethought and the ability to be aware of your surroundings, and that in itself, it can't happen unless you have some levels of contingency, which leads into preparation. And so prepping or being a prepper is just the extension of growth as an individual. It's just common sense that to have things set back. So with that, thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you real soon.